Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Trip, a psychedelic therapy podcast with me, Dr. Esme Dark. During this podcast, I'll be bringing you conversations with thought leaders and other inspiring humans, exploring a wide variety of themes relating to the use of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy in the healing of human distress. Whether you're an aspiring therapist, already a therapist, or just simply interested in the emerging field of psychedelic therapy, then this podcast is for you. Join me for a journey into the psychedelic world. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded land on which this podcast is recorded, the Wadawurrung people. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Beyond the Trip. I'm delighted to be joined by Simon Yugler, who is a depth psychologist, a psychedelic educator, and author of Psychedelics and the Soul, a mythic guide to psychedelic healing, depth psychology, and cultural repair. With a master's in depth counseling psychology from the Pacifica Graduate Institute, he has taught in leading psychedelic training programs all across the US, including Naropa University and Trek. Drawing from Jungian psychology, mythology, and internal family systems, Simon helps facilitators, therapists, and healers reconnect with the liminal wilds of the soul. His work is shaped by years of anthropological research and learning from Indigenous traditions all around the world, including the Shipibo ayahuasca lineage and the Native American Church. In this podcast, we get into all kinds of themes. We explore Simon's connection to Australia. He has spent some time here, and so we did get into that at the beginning of the episode. We talk about Indigenous perspectives in psychedelics, the psychedelic culture in Oregon, where he lives, and how that's different from the psychedelic therapy work that's happening here, and where it's similar to. We talk about depth psychology and psychedelics, something that is a big interest of mine. Of course, we get into plenty of things around his new book. We talk about the challenges of training psychedelic therapists and the importance of that. We talk about therapist burnout, also something very close to my heart, as regular listeners will know. And we also talk about the important piece that is at the end of the title of his book, Cultural Healing, and how psychedelics may be able to help us with this. I loved talking to Simon, and I can't wait to share this episode with you. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed recording this. Hey, welcome, Simon, to Beyond the Trip podcast.
Thank you, Esme. Yeah, it's great to be here.
And, you know, I've been so excited about this conversation, which has been in the works a little bit for a while. I first came across you and your work through another podcast, actually, that someone sent to me when I was prepping for a workshop that I was running around deepening psychedelic therapy with somatics and metaphor at a conference. And so someone sent me, I think it was the one you did on psychedelics today, which was awesome conversation. And then I realized that you were doing a course, and it just so happened that your course that you're running happened to be running at the exact time that I have space to actually attend live. And so that was really amazing. So thank you so much. And it was the course on mythopoetic integration. And so really, really excited to have you here to talk about some of these ideas on the podcast. So thank you so much.
Yeah. It was great having you in the course, and I'm so glad it could work with your schedule all the way in Australia.
I know. What are the chances? I don't have a huge amount of space in there, so I think it was meant to be on some level.
I think so too.
Yeah. And so you actually have a connection to Australia that goes back a long way. And early in your career, am I right that you did some work with Indigenous Australians and you spent some time here? I think the listeners would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, like I said a moment ago to you before we started recording, it's a part of my life that I don't really get to talk about a lot. I was in university studying anthropology. Was 20 years old and applied for and received a grant for undergraduate independent research, and wanted to go to Australia to essentially study the roots of the didgeridoo, or as it's called up in Arnhem Land, the yiraki. And I'd been playing that, for 7 or 8 years, and found my way to a community that I think a lot of Australians would know, called Yirrkala. And Yirrkala is kind of up in the northeastern corner of the Northern Territory in far northeastern Arnhem Land. And it's known because it's actually the hometown of the band Yothu Yindi, the famous Aboriginal rock band. And I got to know a lot of those guys when I was up there. But long story short, I kind of turned it into a little bit of my own personal walkabout, we could say, and started where you're at in Victoria and made it all the way north across the middle of the continent, taking the train and stopping in Alice Springs for a couple weeks and connecting with a lot of, I would say, more like urban Aboriginal youth there in Alice, which is a really vibrant and also very charged place. We could say
complex place.
Yeah, for sure. But I loved it. I really loved it. And then made my way to Darwin and was in Darwin for a while, which is where a lot of Yolngu people from Arnhem Land kind of end up if they want to leave their communities, or are rather forced to leave their communities, which is usually more of what happens. And so had a time in Darwin and eventually took a little plane into Yirrkala, into Arnhem Land, and was there for about a month and went to a lot of ceremonies, gatherings. I was fortunate enough to connect with a nonprofit called ARDS, ARDS, or the Aboriginal Research and Development Services, which does a lot of collaborative development work with homeland communities and outposts, station. I can't remember what they're called, outstations, and also in Yirrkala, and was also fortunate enough to get to a place called Elcho Island off of the northern coast of Arnhem Land, which is a really special community and place. And then I would say the sort of big grand finale of that trip was going to the Garma Festival, which I don't think happens anymore, but was a festival that was put on by the Yothu Yindi mob, basically. And John Butler came and all these other people came. Some of the cast members I remember from 10 Canoes showed up. And I was looking at one of these guys and I was like, why do I know this person? What about this? And I just couldn't get it out of me. I was like, oh my God, he's the star of 10 Canoes. And
wild.
And so, it was just an amazing time. And I was lucky enough to get back to Australia back in 2017. I was leading a study abroad group for a bunch of young, American kids, but that was mostly on the East Coast and Queensland and a bit in Alice Springs. So love Australia. It's very deep in my heart. So
that's beautiful. Wow, what an amazing thing to have done, and amazing places to have visited that a lot of Australians probably have never been to. I went up to Arnhem Land quite a few years ago now, and that there's something very special about that land. And also there's I had iPad on the podcast. Have you met, do you know that crew? So I think Bianca Seven and Gemstone.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yes.
I totally do. I've met Bianca. Bianca's lovely.
Yeah. So they're really looking at ways to kind of bring more Indigenous thinking and representation into the psychedelic space in Australia, which is really awesome and so important. Did you, and on that note, like that's obviously this was a while ago, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was in 2009. 2009.
Yeah, so pretty early on. And now here you are kind of writing your new book about psychedelics and the mythopoetic lens of psychedelics. And I'm wondering, I mean, this is probably a big question, but how do you feel like that time in your life has informed this time? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've realized actually recently that kind of an anthropological lens on the world is actually even deeper for me than a psychological lens or a mythopoetic lens or a psychedelic lens, whatever. To me, it's all actually like grounded in anthropology, which really just means grounded in looking at culture. And and I think when we kind of think about ourselves, or I'll just make it personal, when I think about myself as like a modern Western person in our modern Western culture, you know, there's a lot of, I would say, cultural questions and sort of like head scratching predicaments where it's like, what is going on? Like, how did we get here? How did how did we become this, especially where I live in the States? It's like, wait, what is going on? So to me, these are questions of both, you know, psychology and culture.
Yeah.
And it's why the sort of third phrase in the subtitle of my book is cultural repair, you know, a mythic guide to psychedelic healing, depth psychology, and cultural repair. And it's because of that anthropological through line that has really, you know, taken me to many different cultures and places, you know, Arnhem Land being sort of the first one that I went to, you know, but that journey really continued for most of my 20s and has really shaped me into who I am, and like provided so many like profound, weird experiences that really kind of called into question, you know, my own cultural norms and cultural narratives and ways of looking at the world and ways of understanding what is, quote, real. And experiences that I still can't explain in some of these places.
Yeah. And you talk about kind of the traveling through into different cultures quite a lot in your book, actually, don't you? So maybe you can just, for the listeners, like say a little bit about your work and why you decided to bring it into the world at this particular time. You're in the US. Whereabouts are you exactly too? Because I think people will be interested to hear that.
Yeah. I live in Oregon, in Portland primarily, and Oregon is unique not just because we have like a sort of, I would say, deep psychedelic culture. I mean, the West Coast of the US in general has a pretty deep psychedelic culture, but Oregon especially. It's where a lot of hippies fled to when San Francisco became a little too hectic in the late 60s. So, you know, there's an old hippie culture here, but also Oregon was the first state in the country to pass a bill for legal psilocybin facilitation, where there's now a state regulated training system, a state regulated growing system for cultivating psychedelic mushrooms, testing, approving facilitators, etc. And I've been working in that pretty much since the beginning as a teacher, primarily of facilitators. And it's not perfect by any means, but it's the first iteration of this in the States, which is saying a lot. So
and actually I think that's really important, like what you just spoke about, because one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on the podcast is that we're both kind of working in this field in different countries with very different frames and legal frames, and also kind of the way in which it's been rescheduled here is very different to Oregon. And so I'm excited to kind of to talk about that with you, and those differences and those tensions that are here in the field. Because here in Australia, it's, we, people listening probably know, but we've rescheduled it in a very medical model, so that psychiatrists have to prescribe, they're the authorized prescriber, and it's tied into two different diagnoses. So psilocybin assisted psychotherapy has been made possible to be used for depression, treatment-resistant depression only at the moment, and then MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And so there's so much I could say on that, and I'm sure we're going to get into it, but there is an inherent tension for me in that, tying it into the medical model, that I think is going to be really interesting for us to explore in a few different ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's almost it's almost sort of the polar opposite of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Which is a very, I would say, even though it is in some regards highly regulated, it's still kind of like anyone can walk into a service center and ask for mushrooms, with a few criteria of exclusion, not much though. And anyone also can sort of throw their name into the hat to become a facilitator with a license from the state, without a whole lot of qualifications.
And do they have to have done some training, like the trainings? Because you work on a lot of different trainings, don't you? So do they have to have done that to get a license to use it?
Yeah, they need to have gone through a state-approved psilocybin facilitator training program. I work for one called Inner Trek, which has sort of been around from the beginning, and I would say is like sort of the leading training at this point. There was a lot that popped up in the beginning, and then kind of a huge sort of die back. As it's very much like a natural sort of boom and bust situation. But we're one of the remaining few. There are other programs out there, still doing things, but I don't know how much you want me to get into the weeds with what's going on here, but I could talk your ear off about it. And I have some thoughts. I have some thoughts about it for sure. So
let's do that in a moment. I think I would like to, and I have lots of thoughts about here too, and what's transpiring, and the pros and the cons and the challenges. But actually, I'd love you to just share a little bit about your book, so that people are kind of orientated to that, and tell us a little bit about the book, about why you brought it out at this particular time in the field of psychedelics too, if that feels okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. My book is called Psychedelics and the Soul, a Mythic Guide to Psychedelic Healing, Depth Psychology, and Cultural Repair. It's published by North Atlantic Books. You can get it anywhere you like. Great. It's a book about the psychedelic experience and its parallels to what we could call a mythopoetic understanding of life, which really just means making meaning out of story. And so there are 10 chapters in the book, and each chapter is named after a particular archetype that I feel like has something to do with the psychedelic experience or psychedelic work. And it's a metaphor. So the first chapter is called The Well, for instance. And the well is, I work with two different Irish myths in that chapter. And, the chapter is really about the unconscious. It's about the language of the unconscious, which is imagery and symbolism. It's about kind of learning how to work with those as a facilitator. That's the other element to the book, is I really wanted it to be relevant for people entering this field with a desire to be psychedelic therapists or facilitators or guides. So there is sort of a practical element to each chapter. But each chapter begins with a particular myth or folktale. And these are stories, like I said, from Ireland, Greece, Scandinavia, Native America, Borneo, all over the place. And so I tell the particular story in my own words, which turned out was actually the hardest part of writing this whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
was really metabolizing these stories, some of which, you know, like the myth of Medusa, which I work
Yep.
with, has so many different versions. And then it's up to you as the storyteller to kind of discern which
Yeah.
one feels the most resonant and true.
Yeah.
So I tell the story and then kind of unfold different elements or symbols present in the story and tie those symbols, images, metaphors, characters to different elements of psychedelic work and experience. So just going with Medusa, for instance, that story is all about trauma. In the context of this book, right, I use it to talk about trauma and how psychedelic substances and medicines can interact with and potentially heal trauma, and also like how the story of Medusa is really one of trauma. And you know, there is a healing element that happens in the very end of the story that a lot of people don't know, which is that once Medusa's head is cut off by the hero Perseus, and you know, usually Medusa is sort of a villain. You know, I really wanted to kind of tell the story almost from her perspective. So once her head is cut off, there are 2 drops of blood that are collected from her. Well, actually, I should say different things. So there are 2 beings that come out of her headless body. And one is this gigantic being with a golden sword called Creosaur, and I don't know who that is, but there's a giant with a sword, and then the other being that emerges out of Medusa is Pegasus. And Pegasus, I have this bit in the book about, you know, what the medicine of Pegasus actually is about. And then there's one more sort of postscript to the story, which is that Athena collected 2 drops of blood from Medusa's head. And that blood turned into all of the poison and all of the medicine in the world. So again, it's like poison, medicine.
Which one is it?
Which one is it? And also like that which has the power to kill also has the power to heal, and vice versa.
Yeah. Beautiful. And I think, you know, I really love your book, and I've been kind of revisiting it and reading it. And there's something about myth and story that, just to take it to like for a personal level, that I don't know kind of how to explain this exactly, but it gets into your body, into your feeling body, in a way that if you just said, okay, like trauma can be both healing and difficult, it wouldn't land in the same way, right? And, you know, my first interaction with my journey with depth psychology and myth goes back quite a long way, but I remember I was in the middle of like a terrible breakup. It was awful 7 years ago, and I was at a market, a beautiful market out in the forest here that we have, and I found, classically, I just came across this book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. I'd kind of heard of it, not really. I knew some things about it, and when I read that book, it was like she was speaking to some part deep inside me that had been sleeping a long time. And then it just opened up the door to go, oh, these stories are ancient. And people have been feeling this and feeling these things for the whole of time. And that was something about that I found really deeply comforting and supportive. I don't know if I have a question there, but just a comment on, like, for me, that's what myth has done.
Yeah. I mean, that book is definitely like one of the greats in this tradition, in this mythopoetic tradition, you know, and so many people kind of find their way back to story, kind of just like you shared, through people like Clarissa Pinkola Estes and Robert Bly and Michael Mead, and kind of this crew of people that really emerged in like the late 80s and early 90s doing this mythopoetic kind of Jungian inspired work. to kind of like make myths relevant once again, and I would say that tradition and those people have really inspired me, and I look at them as like my elders and ancestors. And so, yeah, I mean, even to be mentioned in the same sentence as someone like Clarissa Pinkola Estes is like a huge honor, and is what I'm kind of trying to do. But in this context and this moment we're in of psychedelics kind of bursting into our collective psyche. And it like it or not, it's happening. And I just felt like a book needed to be written that connects these two worlds, which are kind of two of my deepest loves, which is depth psychology and mythopoetics and story and culture, with psychedelic healing and experiences and traditions,
Yes. As I was just sitting reflecting then, I was thinking about what I was sharing about the feeling, like that myth speaks to sort of a feeling in my body in a way that if you were to just say a sentence to me, it wouldn't land in the same way. And I was thinking that, psychedelics are a bit like that too, in my experience, that people come out of their experiences, their journeys with these learnings, these kind of insights or whatever those are. And if I said that to a client, I've been a therapist for a long time, maybe like 15 years more than, if I just said some of the things that people come out of their journeys with to them, they'd be like, I see what you mean, like I get it. But they say that actually now what they do is they feel it in their body. And that feels really different. So I guess in a way, to me, just reflecting for myself, it makes a lot of sense to bring those two things together, to bring myth and psychedelics together. But you might have a bigger story as to why you wanted to do that right now at this time, like particularly this moment,
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think the reason that both psychedelic experiences and myth kind of resonate on that deeper, sometimes somatic level, or at least let's just say like a very felt, visceral level, is because at least according to depth psychology, the language of the psyche is images, and it is because that are like the oldest language that we know is image. That's why these stories speak to us in such a deep way. And it's also why I would say in a psychedelic experience, we can really emerge. Of course, there's all of the sort of pharmacological aspects going on. But I don't think that's it by any means. Because images often emerge in these experiences, journeys, beings, felt senses that we have a hard time putting words to. I feel like, and I talk about this in the introduction of the book, but myth, dreams, and psychedelic experiences, altered states of consciousness, all kind of emerge and speak to the same place. And I would call that place the soul, and they're all, emanations of the deep soul, and they all are doorways back into that same place, which is why you could just tell someone something, but if there's an image and a story, it's actually creating a pathway into a deeper part of our being. Just like, as a therapist, you can tell someone something for years, and it might not land, and then they have a psychedelic experience and they experience something for themselves, and then everything's different,
Yeah, exactly. Like I had an experience of, I won't go into the whole sort of backstory, but of actually really feeling, like always kind of knowing that we are a part of nature, and that of course, because we're humans and we are a part of that system. But then suddenly really actually having the feeling of that in my body, that makes me experience that in a different way and makes me be in the world in a different way because of that feeling. Trauma, yeah. So there's plenty of things to say about that. But I think one of the things that I was thinking, how I came across you is I was writing this talk about somatics and metaphor with my co-therapist. So there was a really awesome, really small, beautiful conference here called the Northern Australian Psychedelic Conference, NAPS. And they invited us to apply, and my co-therapist and I, because here in Australia, we work in dyads. So it's myself and another psychologist or therapist, psychotherapist or psychiatrist. We're feeling like we really wanted to try to work out what exactly we were doing. Because here in Australia, I guess we were sort of doing the research. I was involved in a big research trial, and then quite sort of, I'm going to say unexpectedly, they rescheduled psilocybin assisted therapy and MDMA assisted therapy quite quickly. It hasn't rolled out really fast, but it certainly happened a little bit unexpectedly, particularly with the psilocybin assisted therapy. And sort of without, I would say, like, I feel like America has a lot of a much longer history in terms of psychedelic research, in terms of people being much more aware. And so my colleague and I were thinking, we feel like a bit of an obligation to actually try and nail down what it is we're doing, because we're not just doing what the way that we work is a bit, I guess, in the psychotherapy way, is a bit different maybe than just holding space. What it is a bit different than just holding that space. So what are we actually doing in our preparation, in our integration, which are all kind of packaged in a process here that you kind of have to go through. And so that's why we decided to write Somatics and Metaphor talk and did the workshop. And I think it's, I heard you say on another podcast that there's a lot of the basics of psychedelic education out there. There's a lot of people learning just how to do just, like being present and all of the important, really important stuff around set and setting. But there's a need for something more now. And I really feel like, I just want to say that I really feel like your book is that. Like, I think it's the next level. So thank you for doing that. And I hope more people do that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, for sharing, that's high praise. So thanks.
And so maybe now we can get into where we were naming up earlier, that you and I are coming from these two different models, really, in terms of legal frameworks. And in the second page, I think is it the second page of your book that you say that psychedelics are not about improving mental health, right?
Yeah.
And I thought that was an amazing mic drop moment, by the way. And I think it's really interesting because here I feel like they've been so tied into that medical model. And I have feelings about that. But maybe you can start about what you meant when you said that.
Sure. Yeah. It was meant to be a mic drop moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is a somewhat controversial opinion. And I think it's controversial for a lot of different reasons, primarily because the psychedelic movement is sort of pushing upstream against so many decades of prohibition and fear and misinformation, right? That there's this overcompensation now to legitimize psychedelics in the eyes of the general public and the scientific community and the medical community by being like, look, these are safe. These aren't going to change your chromosomes, which was one of the lies about LSD. These aren't going to burn holes in your brain, which is one of the lies about MDMA.
Oh my God.
These aren't going to make you psychotic, which was sort of the story, with a lot of psychedelics. So there's so much stigma, first of all, decades and decades. If we could even say centuries, if not like millennia of stigma against being in an altered state of consciousness, against having, let's say, a coherent interaction, having a relationship with a non-human intelligence or organism. I mean, that would get you burned. at the stake.
Yes.
Couple hundred years ago, so
yeah.
This isn't like light stuff. So I think the urge to like legitimize psychedelics comes from that place.
Yeah.
Secondly, I would say there's another element here, which is the sort of really insidious monster called capitalism, which needs everything to be about productivity and optimization and more and better. And right after I say psychedelics are not about improving mental health, I say they're not about having a slightly better day at the office either. Which is another narrative that I think has sort of gotten its way into the psychedelic conversation of like, oh, just microdose and your tech job will be so much better, and just go back to work and just work harder. It's so much easier to work longer hours for your corporate job if you just microdose. And to me, that's some really dystopian shit that was actually called out years ago, decades ago, by Aldous Huxley. That's some Huxleyan Brave New World kind of shit right there. And so I'm very skeptical of that sort of line of thinking, which is very present in the psychedelic world as well. And then I think there's also just sort of this third, even more subtle cultural story that we're kind of up against, which is this story of, I guess, what we could call rational materialism, or anything that, how do I say this? Anything that is like not a human being is not conscious, right? And basically everything that is out there in the natural world is for our disposal and for our use as humans. And so it's a very slippery slope, I would say, into viewing psychedelics as sort of molecules, dead molecules rather than living beings. And the purpose of these dead molecules is to, quote, improve our mental health, because we've fucked up our planet and our society so much that this is their role now. And I think that whole equation is deeply flawed. Yes, they have immense medicine for our species, especially at this time on this planet. But I do not think we should conflate that they are here for our just here for our improvement of our mental health, as these sort of inanimate objects that we can just sort of smash apart and extract.
Use and extract. And what, I would say, and I've spoken a little bit about this before, so regular listeners will have heard me say things like this, but mental health diagnoses and the way that we use them in the West are socially constructed. That it's not like a table in front of me. It's a label that we put on a series of symptoms. That what are we even talking about here? We actually, when we talk about depression, are we talking about actually that idea of, depression, emotions pushed down, depressed? Or are we talking about the distress, the very human distress that we feel at the state of the world or the individualistic culture that we exist in? And I don't think, I think, it's been a real tension for me personally, because I don't work using medical model diagnoses really. And I was not trained in such a way. Like I learned the DSM and then I was taught how to throw it out again,
Great. That's good. Whoever taught you that did a good job.
Yes. Lucy Johnston and Mary Boyle, they wrote the Power Threat Meaning Framework. She was my teacher. Lucy was my teacher, which is an alternative to medical model diagnoses, which is used in the UK actually. But I totally understand. I understand how we got to where we are in Australia in a way. And I can see that I really understand the kind of everything that you said before about needing to try to legitimize it, make it less scary for people, that we kind of, in somehow that ended up in the medical model. I don't think it's not a coincidence to me that psychedelics work across all these different diagnoses, because what are we actually talking about anyway? We're talking about human distress. Do we need to medicalize it? Do we need to label it in that way? I don't think so. Maybe we do for research. I don't know. Like, I'm really hopeful, and I know that the lab and my boss Paul is also interested in kind of more things that are not necessarily about medical model diagnosis, like looking at how psychedelics might impact polarization or family violence and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't mean to come off like I'm some like crystal shaking woo-woo person who's going to like try to heal you with a feather or something.
Yeah.
And granted, those people are real actually and exist. But
Yes.
I'm not one of those people. But I think like the medical framework has a place, right?
Yeah.
I just think maybe to me, there's like an ethical imperative as people working in this field to be honest about where the medical model has failed millions and millions of people across the world. And I would say like ethnocentrism of the Western medical model. Some people would even go as far to say as like the white supremacy of the medical model. There's all these inherited sort of systems that feed into what we call the medical model. And look, if someone needs a diagnosis to receive psychedelic care so that they can have, let's say, some insurance company or maybe their job pay for treatment which they couldn't otherwise afford, great, wonderful. That's beautiful. And I think we do a massive disservice to everyone and everything involved if we say that is the end of the story.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think, I also understand why in research those labels are helpful in terms of the way that our research is currently structured and the way that like evidence-based practice works, and needing some of those labels sometimes to be able to contribute to the literature. So I'm not saying that we should totally throw it out. And my clients in Australia come to see me because they can use the mental health care plans that we are attached, and they're attached to a diagnosis. But and the people who come on the trials that we work on, usually, so far the ones I've worked on have been attached to like a diagnosis of PTSD or generalized anxiety. I don't think that's always going to be the case, actually, but at the moment it has been, and it helps people. But I feel like, it's interesting. I'm writing some, probably by the time this podcast is out, actually, it will have happened, some training at the moment about clinical psychedelic therapy for Monash. And I'm doing a lecture on preparation, like psychedelic preparation. And I feel like sometimes in psychedelic preparation, I'm like, okay, so you're here with this label, and my job becomes, okay, let's actually understand what's really going on here. Let's look at what's underneath this. Let's that's the label. And so many times, the label can mean so many different things at different times for people. And so, but what's actually causing the distress? What do you actually, what's really happening here? And so I'm trying to write that into my lecture at the moment. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think if you get deep enough beneath whatever the label is, or the symptom, or the behavior, right? Kind of these more measurable words.
Yeah.
You get deep down enough and you start entering the territory of the soul. Yeah. And, you get past the depression, you get past the emotions even, and you get to the soul of the person in front of you, which even if you get past that, you're connecting actually to the soul of the world and the soul of the collective, because, we are just animals living on this planet, which we are harming immensely at this time. So it's really not a great mystery why so many of us are having a really hard time, because, and that's why my book is called Psychedelics and the Soul, because these medicines go deep to that place. And And I just think we just need to treat them as such. Really
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
that's about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting actually, because right before I recorded this, before we met today, I was just having a look at a very new paper that's just been published by Max Wolf and some other authors, reframing psychedelic regulation as tools, not treatments. And I think it's pretty interesting. They're kind of talking about it in the sense of that actually they are a tool and they don't need to be seen as a kind of specific treatment for a diagnostic label. And so I'm happy to share that in the notes for anyone who wants to have a look at it, because I think it's a really important perspective. It's like, it's kind of, I guess the depth psychology lens feels really strong in the group that I work in here in Australia. Like, we're all very interested in those ideas coming from slightly different lenses. Like your depth psychology lens is through Jung, right? Like Carl Jung. Do you want to say a little bit about that, actually, for people listening?
Sure. Yeah. Depth psychology is usually these days sort of shorthand for Jungian psychology. Really, it just means any form or tradition of psychology that kind of takes the unconscious as a primary element to our experience. Freud was a depth psychologist, actually. So it's these days, like I said, it really just kind of means Jungian and archetypal psychology. Archetypal psychology being kind of what James Hillman developed, who was sort of, I wouldn't say a protege, but like an inheritor of the Jungian tradition, and really kind of, I would say, took Jung's work further. And there's many more people who kind of emerged out of that in the Jungian world as analysts and writers and whatever. And then, like I said, like we were talking about earlier, kind of in the late 80s and 90s, poets and other kinds of writers and storytellers and all these other kinds of people started kind of being magnetized back into the Jungian world, so to speak. Joseph Campbell wasn't a psychologist. He was a mythologist, 100%, and a classics scholar, right? But his work was deeply inspired by Carl Jung. So Joseph Campbell is also like a deep thread in the tradition of depth psychology now as it stands. And so really it's just about working with the unconscious and the language of the unconscious, which, like I said earlier, emerges symbolically through imagery in things like dreams, in things like myth. We don't know who wrote these stories, right? They have no author. James Hillman said that myths never were, but always are. So they're emanations. Jung said that myths are emanations of the pre-conscious psyche. Like they just have emerged through human cultures. And then the other thread is altered states of consciousness, which includes psychedelics, so that's why, to me, depth psychology and psychedelic healing, it's so intimately intertwined.
Yes. And kind of it makes so much sense when you explain it. So it's such a beautiful explanation as well. And, I guess Stan Groff's work was also kind of a type of depth psychology in a way as well.
For sure.
Really
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of those kind of early sort of psychedelic therapists and writers, Terence McKenna as well, were all Jungians basically, or at least they were really well studied in Jung.
Yeah. And I think, so I do think, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm interested in this space and so I talk to other people who are, but I do think there is a real interest in kind of developing people who've kind of come into the psychedelic space here in Australia, and then maybe they're interested in depth psychology, or vice versa, people in the depth psychology world, like Jungian analysts or other kinds of people who are then moving more into this space now that there's a bit more of a legal framework. So I'll put some of those authors' names in the show notes as well, so people can kind of have a dive into those, because it's such a rich, beautiful world. yeah, I also really love the book Trauma and the Soul by as well. That's another amazing book that I found like
Great
a really
book.
good companion for my work in this space. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful book.
Yeah. Recommended to me actually by one of my very first clients on the psilocybin assisted psychotherapy trial for generalized anxiety disorder here. So super incredibly grateful to all of my clients for all of the teachings, particularly to that client in this moment for recommending that book and opening that door, which was which was always there and my interest was always there, but then it kind of re-emerged for me. So maybe I would be curious you said before that you have thoughts about the way things are rescheduled in Oregon, because I have lots of thoughts and I've shared a few about here and how it's working. And I think it's, I can share some more of those, but I remember when I first heard about Oregon, I was like, I think it was a bit of kind of, that sounds like a great model in many ways. Like nothing is perfect. How's it going? In your opinion? Pros and cons. Yeah.
I think in the grand scheme of things, Esme, it is going as well as it could.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I will also say there are some major gaps and discrepancies that are extremely present, at least to me, without kind of going too deep into the details. What I will say is this: me as a psychotherapist, right? Just to sit and have a conversation with someone requires about 3 years of graduate school and then 3 to 5 years of supervised practice, right?
Yeah.
So that's like anywhere from 6 to 8 years of training and supervision to sit and have a conversation with someone for an hour.
Yeah.
So the Oregon psilocybin service feels that it is somehow appropriate that people can get a certificate in 6 months or less and do I think it's a 160-hour practicum retreat, which is essentially a weekend, to get a license from the state to give people 50 milligrams of psilocybin, which equates to around 7 or 8 grams of dried psilocybin. So you tell me if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, I think we have I think, isn't it interesting? It also, like, to be a clinical psychologist, I trained in the UK, came over here, but did all my training in England. It was 7 years, it was 7 years. And then I continue to it's a requirement that I continue to have supervised supervision, not supervised practice in the traditional sense, but that I keep doing that.
Yeah. There's no supervision requirements here. There's no continuing education. There's very little ethical sort of there's not even a board. There's more of like a sort of state organization. It's not even really a board of practitioners. There's like a loose conglomeration of organizations that are aspiring to be kind of ethical watchdogs and whatever, but like nothing has really coalesced. So, it's sort of chaos.
Yeah. I can imagine. And it's really interesting because I'm sitting listening to you and I was like, it sounds like they've really, like, Oregon's really nailed it in many ways. And you certainly brought it in slower, like it took a bit longer than the way we did it here, which I think was good. But the same issue in a different way I have found here. So it's not the same thing exactly, but because they sort of looked at these things as medicines, so psilocybin, it's actually synthetic psilocybin that they use here. So it's the stuff that you get, and MDMA, needs to be prescribed by a psychiatrist. And they did sort of then specify that it needs to be within the framework of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. For a while, it was only clinical psychologists and psychiatrists, and now more and more psychotherapists are allowed as well, which is great, but also crazy that they weren't from the beginning, in my opinion. But there was the first thing that I was talking about with people when it happened was, where's the requirement for training with this? Because a psychiatrist can go through medical school and do like a very small amount of psychotherapy training. And if we're actually putting these medicines within a psychotherapy framework, surely people need to be trained in that, really. And so that continues to be one of my concerns for the field here. There's still, I think, because of the way the system operates here, mainly, they're two different things. So the drug regulator is probably the same. In America, the drug regulatory system is different to the therapy regulatory system here. And so they didn't feel they could sort of legislate that. But it feels like a huge missing piece, It's so important, to have had to do your own work, whatever that looks like, to be supervised, to
have a connection to the actual substance that you are giving people, maybe. I mean, it's funny. It's like, on paper, it kind of makes sense. It's like, oh, well, these things work in the brain, so let's let the brain doctors, they must know what to do with them.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe. I mean, it looks good on paper, but I don't think it actually translates,
And, it depends on the psychiatrist and the psychologist and it depends, right? But you're rolling the dice there, There's an awful lot of people who could become authorized prescribers who've probably never had a psychedelic experience. And, it's complicated here because it's actually really difficult to have those legally here. There's not a training program where you can go and have legal psychedelic experience as a psychologist. We were very fortunate that we did a self-experience research trial before we began our big 2-year research trial. But not everybody does that. In fact, lots of people are not able to do that for funding reasons and things like that.
Yeah. I think that's the most essential piece in even considering doing this work professionally as a facilitator or therapist, and it's disheartening to hear, Esme, that it's either financially or legally prohibitive for professionals to get the experience they need in Australia in order to be confident enough with these medicines, But you know what? I'll also say, like, have you ever seen the Alien movies? Like,
yes,
you know what I'm talking about, with the eggs and the things, James Cameron, whatever. So bear with me. I feel like, what is the moral of the story in every single one of the Alien movies? It's the same.
Oh my God, I don't know. It's been years since I've watched them. You're going to have to tell me.
It's the same point in every single film, which is that the alien will always get out.
Yeah.
They try to contain this wild, otherworldly thing and like extract its uses for them because they're silly humans. And it always gets out. It always breaks loose and causes chaos. And I feel like psychedelics are kind of the same. They always will get out. And so I'm not really encouraging people to go do illegal things, but it's like, it's out there anyways. So, the alien always gets out, and we can try to control it and contain it and extract it and torture it. But it will usually end up escaping. Yeah,
exactly. You're right. And I think also, there are places now that people can, if they have the resource, travel to. Like you worked in Jamaica, for example. So there's legal psilocybin retreats there. There's also the Netherlands and other places too, where people can go and have those legal experiences. And we're working really hard here to advocate for therapist training involving medicine work or dosing with the medicines, because I do think that there's a large feeling in the space that it is really important. It's just that it's happened so quickly. It was only 6 months, I think, before there was the announcement, and then things started to roll out. The reality is the rollout's been a lot slower than, because it takes ages and the red tape is crazy, which is actually kind of good, I think. I think the red tape for once has helped us out to slow things down a little bit. There was lots of bit like what you're talking about, like everything bubbled up and everyone wanted to do it. And then certain clinics and places kind of fell away, and now it's just kind of slowly rolling out, which is good.
Yeah, good. So it sounds like a natural cycle.
Yeah, I think so. So we're at an hour. Is it okay if I ask you a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'm good for time. I'm chilling. So
great, awesome. So maybe I would love to something actually on therapist and therapist training to take us into the topic of burnout, because you spoke about that in your book. I have had burnout twice, not actually since doing this work, although I'm really mindful that it was definitely possible. And I'm really worried about it in the community in Australia because of many reasons, actually, like a lot of productivity and capitalist stuff that you spoke about, but just the intensity of holding space for that long for people. I don't know if I have the answers to how to support the workforce, but I'm curious about your reflections on burnout for yourself and what you think would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, something that I say to a lot of my students is like, don't quit your day job.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you do that, you are dependent on psychedelics for your livelihood in some way. And then when you get into that situation, you might end up sort of talking with someone and a little voice on your shoulder is like, nope, not a good idea. And you're like, oh, well, I need the money, I need the money. And you say yes, and something really bad happens. And you don't want that, So when there is not that pressure to say yes to everyone, to do, so many sessions a week or a month, I think we really need to like take the pressure off with this work. And I think there's even like cultural precedent of saying no, of like, no, you're not ready. No, come back, ask me 3 times, whatever it is. Go do this other work first and then come back, I think I've seen a lot of people seek out psychedelics kind of as like a last resort, as like if this doesn't work, I'm going to kill myself kind of thing.
Yeah.
People have said that to me before.
And me. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a rough situation to be in as a therapist or facilitator. It's like maybe some other things need to happen before this, So there's all of those pieces, which I would call more like clinical considerations. And then there's the like you named sort of the capitalism piece of like, I think, psychedelics reveal the soul. That is literally the origins of the name in Greek. Psyche and delos, soul revealing. And so they will magnify and reveal like whatever is going on, and they will also clarify what's going on. And I feel like they have a role to play in capitalism that we don't really understand yet. And I'm not naive enough to think that they're somehow going to like fix or end capitalism. But I also don't think that they are going to entirely conform either, because just by their very nature, they kind of go against the grain of what capitalism asks and demands, rather. So, I mean, burnout, there was a period in Jamaica. We would do, usually our schedule there was we would do week-long retreats. This was at Myco Meditations in Treasure Beach. Usually it was a week on and a week off.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. I loved it. That's how I started
Mm.
writing my book, is in those
Mm.
off weeks. But there was a period of time kind of towards the end of my tenure there where we, I don't know, someone wanted to schedule more retreats back to back. So we would have like 1 to 2 days off between retreats for like a month plus. And that was very intense, and kind of brought me into a level of burnout that I've never experienced before or since. And it's just inherent in the work. There's such an energetic output, even if you're just sitting still and you're silent as the facilitator or therapist for 6 hours, whatever. It can still be so draining, inexplicably draining, that to not have the time to kind of really reconstitute yourself, and fill your tank, there's extreme risk of getting very depleted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, I agree. I agree. And like, I think that space in between is so important, that, that week off, in between, week on, week off, feels so important. And I've said this before, I think on this podcast, but like psychedelics give you a lot and they take a lot in a different way. There's this process that happens of like, I don't know how to put this into words, trying to give words to the ineffable really, but like that kind of awe that I get sometimes, that kind of from sitting as someone, and that feeling of awe that's quite contagious, that's like amazing. But it can also be, in the same session, like witnessing someone go through and re-experience their trauma in a way that's really healing for them. But that can be very intense for a therapist to see. With MDMA, people often will talk a lot about that, and that's amazing. It can be a really important part of that process. And then what do we do after that? Because a lot of clinics here are set up with the expectation that people will work once a week, they'll dose once a week, and then they'll do kind of, therapy sessions alongside that. And I did that flow with the Psychedelic trial. It was like a dose on, say, like a Tuesday, and then a bunch of therapy sessions, which could be prep or integration on the next day. For 18 months, I think we did that. And I loved it. I absolutely learned so much, and I loved my colleagues. And I think that makes a massive difference. I had an incredible community, a lot of good group supervision, and my dyad partner is one of my favorite people in the world. So that was helpful. But by the end, we were all tired. There's no way that I wanted to jump straight onto another trial, but I needed a break, and maybe more breaks in between might have helped a little bit too. But that was okay. I don't know what the answer is. I think we really need to think about how we roll this out and how we're setting up clinics, and the kind of the way in which people are working in them, because for some people it will be their whole job. I think for some people it is already. And I worry about that, because it's everything you just said. I don't have the answer. I don't have it all figured out. I have my I know what burnout can feel like, and how quickly it can catch you out. Like I remember being in my house when I used to work in refugee mental health. That's a whole other story.
Me too.
But it was, oh really?
Yeah.
It's very common in this field. Yeah, I wonder why.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. That was so. I did 10 years in Foundation House, it's called, which is kind of a service for torture survivors and refugee background people.
Wow.
And it was off the back of our response to the Syrian war. So the big war in Syria, we had I was managing a team of people, and it was it was obviously the trauma, and then the cognitive load of trying to deal with too many things at the same time. And I was in my house with my best friend was there, and I had an onion and I had a knife, and I didn't remember how to chop the onion. I was like, I don't know what to do now. Like, how do I do? I've actually just shut down.
Yeah. The poet David White has a really amazing story about burnout, about working this was before he was like a full-time poet and was working in some organization in Seattle for some like high pressure situation. I don't know what kind of organization, but he was just had been running around like crazy for months and months. And he has a story where he walked into the room and he says, it was like a board meeting room. And he says, has anyone seen David? And they all, and they all kind of stop and look at him. And it's like, dude, you are David.
Oh God. Yeah.
And he tells it as this story of like, and that's when I knew I needed to quit, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And wouldn't it be good if it could not get to that point, right? You know,
it is. I call it the frog in the pot. And it really is like the frog in the pot because we don't know it's happening until we're already cooked.
Yeah. I wonder if having the experience a few times has helped me to notice it a bit more. I don't know. I'll tell you in 5 years. So far, it's been pretty good. But I think you've got to really, with this work, you need really good supervision and support and people around you to help you. Because sometimes you don't notice, but your friends or your colleagues do, I think.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything that we haven't covered that you really want to share about in this last little part? I'm going to have a look too.
I'll be offering my course again at some point. So I'd like to talk about that at some point. But yeah, I mean, any other questions you want to ask, I'm happy to answer.
Well, there was something, I guess I'd love to talk a little bit more about the piece around cultural repair, which we have touched on a few times throughout, because it feels like the world is in a lot of pain right now. There's a lot happening, not in the States, but all over the world. And so tell me a bit about that part of the book and what that means and how you think psychedelics might be supportive, but what also are the challenges with that?
Yeah, the cultural repair piece is, like I would say like the broadest element of the perspective that I'm trying to articulate in the book. And it's also the hardest one to talk about because it is so collective and trying to understand, you know, the roots of our problems as a culture, as a people, as a planet, you know, and asking this like maybe naive question, which is, what role do psychedelics have to play in this process of cultural healing and repair? And someone said to me once, in order to repair something, you have to understand how it's broken first. And so a lot of these myths actually to me are also kind of trailheads or, you know, coded language about, you know, how we got where we are in so many ways. Yeah, it's one of these elements where it's like, I think we're so used to wanting the blueprint or the bullet point list or the action plan. And it's like, I don't know if I have that for you or anyone, right? I don't have it in the book. It's more of like the conversation. It's like framing psychedelic work in this broader and collective context of cultural repair and healing, collective healing, which, you know, again, isn't something I'm just like making up, but is something that the various medicines themselves often point towards are collective experiences, collective stories, collective think. Maybe they're ancestral, maybe they're ecological, right? It's like so often, not all the time, but often, you know, psychedelic experiences open us to that collective level that if we were walking around all day like feeling that, we would not be able to get out of bed. We wouldn't be able to function because it would be so immense. You know, and these medicines can sometimes like create openings to feel really what's going on. So that's sort of the easiest way I can talk about it.
Yeah. And maybe if we can feel what's going on, that's where we can also start to shift or change or something from that place rather than a bullet point list.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Joanna Macy, who just passed away a few days ago as of this recording, in her work, which is called The Work That Reconnects, talks about like honoring the pain, facing the pain of the world as sort of the first step, the first thing in that whole process. And that involves grief. And I think also, we're culturally allergic to grief.
Yeah.
And psychedelics also have a role to play in that, because we might think that we're doing just fine, and then we take a dose of mushrooms or MDMA, and then we're like, oh, right, there's all this other stuff that I have not been looking at. Maybe it's mine, maybe it's not even mine, and it's just, again, this collective thing, but I think that's another role that these medicines often play, is like, it's like, hey, just take a look down there for a minute. And we look and we're like, oh, wow.
There's a lot of pain and a lot of sadness and a lot of grief. We are, aren't we? We are so allergic to grief. It's how different might things be if we could all really feel that, actually, and have so many practices. I did some IFS training, the Legacies and Burdens training with Kay Gardner, like a little while ago now. And I won't go into that. There's so much I could say about that particular training, but we did a collective grief ritual at the end, which was a very beautiful process. And there was maybe 30 of us in the room, and people were just crying and sobbing and supporting each other, holding each other through that. And it was beautiful. And so lacking, in our general, I mean, I'm English, right? So we're the prime. We know everything about just keep calm and carry on, stiff upper lip, don't cry. It took me years to learn how to cry in front of people, and I still find it a little bit hard, much better than I used to be. But and I celebrate it now. I'm like, I'm crying in front of a person. The therapy and the psychedelic work has helped, sure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. So let's hear it. Do you want to share a little bit about your course? I mean, I think it's great that you're doing it again, and for people listening, and maybe also where they can find it too.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to be launching my course again, which is called Mythopoetic Integration. And we're going to do 7 weeks this time, because I don't think 6 was enough. So it's a 7-week course online. I'll be launching it either in the fall or kind of early winter. So like, I guess, October, November, December time. And you can learn more about that just on my website, which is simonyugler.com. And then, if folks want to stay in touch and sort of keep up to date on what I'm doing, I also have a Substack where I post an article once or twice a month, and also host a monthly mythopoetic integration circle online for paid Substack subscribers. And that's just simonyugler.substack.com.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think, that the course that you're running, it was just so useful and powerful to kind of just dive a little bit deeper into how we might do this work really well to people. So I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited for you to run it again.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm so glad you were there.
Okay. And I just want to say, as we've kind of wrap up towards the end now, thank you so much again for your time. I know that you must be really busy with the book being launched. I'm sure it wasn't easy to find a space, so I'm really grateful. And is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap?
Not really. I can't wait to get back to Australia. So if anyone listening out there, wants wants to put something together and help me out, as an excuse to get back to Australia, that'd be just so great. So
all right, that would be great. I would love that too. And I would love to get back over to Oregon myself. Actually, I did an amazing road trip there many years ago, up there from Bend to Portland.
Oh yeah,
it was really, really beautiful.
Nice.
So yeah, we'd love to have you come over here. Maybe there'll be some conference or something else. I think we've got a lot to learn from each other, in our different ways of working with these medicines. I think when you are doing it in a certain way, you can get kind of stuck into that must be the only way. So I think it's actually really important to have these kind of conversations across countries and across different areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much agree. And cultures too.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Simon.
All right, Esme. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you're interested in following along on the journey with me, check out my Instagram or website details listed in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share this podcast to help get this important conversation out to more listeners.